I'm Chan Seals in Washington. This is Newsy Tonight. Just over a year since the Capitol insurrection, tonight the Justice Department ups the ante with the strongest charges we've seen yet. Stewart Rhodes, the founder and leader of the far-right Oath Keepers militia group, and 10 of his associates were charged with seditious conspiracy. The indictment alleges they discussed trying to overturn the election for weeks, essentially setting up battle plans January 6th. Text messages suggesting maybe they ferry a boat of weapons across the Potomac into D.C., the use of tactical formations to breach Capitol grounds, chat messages about the prospect of violence with the alleged purpose of scaring members of Congress as they did their job. Newsy Tonight, Sasha Ingber covers national security for us. She's been following this story for the last year and especially today. Sasha, just in plain English, what is seditious conspiracy?
Good evening, Chance. So a seditious conspiracy is all about planning to resist lawful authority. And in this incident, it means plotting to oppose the presidential transition by force. Now, with more than 725 arrests that have been done just in this January 6th insurrection, today is the first time that we have seen this charge. And federal prosecutors shy away from ambitious charges because they like to go for charges that are easier to prove to get those wins in the court.
Because they have to prove it, right? So how do the feds go about building a case of seditious conspiracy? What do they have to prove?
Well, this particular incident, this indictment has 48 pages, and they go into great detail, step by step. There are literally minute-by-minute replays of what happened inside the Capitol. There's communications saying things like, we aren't getting through this without a civil war. We'll do it again. We got food for 30 days. Now, it all starts with the head of the Oath Keepers, Stewart Rhodes, as you mentioned, starting an encrypted communication on a platform called Signal, called DC Op January 621. Now, after he started this, 2 days after Trump lost the election, there were efforts to recruit, to train, to amass firearms, and Stewart Rhodes himself actually continued to buy firearms even after the insurrection, according to this document. So they have a tremendous amount of evidence to back this up.
Seems like they're saying, no, people didn't just get swept away, you know, in the rush of January 6th. And you actually talked to the estranged wife of the Oath Keepers founder?
That's right. I caught up with TASHA Adams. Now, she basically told me that she stopped supporting him and his beliefs years ago, and that they ultimately didn't have a happy marriage, that she felt like a rag doll in their marriage. And she shared more insight beyond what we already know, which is that he is a Yale graduate, that he is the leader and founder of this far-right group, and that he is an Army veteran. Here's what she told me.
I hope that they receive time that's fair for what they did and what they tried to do. I think they tried to disrupt the election. I think they thought they were going to install their own version of government, and they wanted to be a part of it. And I think it was part of Stewart fulfilling his vision of himself, where he always saw himself as a great character in history. And I guess in a really dark way that came true. But he always saw himself as a Thomas Jefferson or a George Washington. And I think that was part of him fulfilling his personal mythology.
Now, extremism experts are worried that there could be more insurrection-type activities at more local levels. So a very important message coming from the government tonight.
Newsy national security correspondent Sasha Ingber. Huge developments more than a year later, and Merrick Garland out there promising to keep going. This indictment comes as DOJ forms a brand new unit. The focus of the unit is combating domestic terrorism. Officials say the number of related FBI probes has more than doubled since March 2020.
We face an elevated threat from domestic violent extremists. We've seen a growing threat from those who are motivated by racial animus, as well as those who ascribe to extremist, anti-government, and anti-authority ideologies.
The announcement came just days after the commemoration of the January 6th riots. And even as some lawmakers are saying, that whole thing was underestimated as a threat from the beginning. Kenneth Gray is senior lecturer at the University of New Haven and retired FBI special agent with 24 years of service. Kenneth, how strong is this sedition case when it comes to the Oath Keepers? A few things here. The indictment says that they planned to gain control of Capitol grounds, and that's based on communications. They used military formations, which was on video. They had radio equipment. They did not bring firearms into D.C., but the indictment says they had them waiting just outside city lines. How strong is that case?
So it sounds like a fairly strong case. Of course, it will depend upon how the jury views the facts when they put it all together. But nonetheless, they are building all the elements towards the criminal acts itself. And so we will see how strong it actually is when it gets time to go to trial. But it sounds like they have all the elements there.
The Department of Justice just announced this week it's launching a new domestic terrorism unit. When you were with the Bureau, you worked on terrorism cases. How do they make sure that they target truly dangerous people in this country and it doesn't become, I guess, thought police? Because it might be unpopular, but it's legal to be an anarchist, a white supremacist, a communist in this country. Where is the line for who they investigate?
So unlike international terrorism, where international terrorism, there's specific laws on the books against international terrorism, domestic terrorism, there are no federal violations that specifically prohibit domestic terrorism. Instead, domestic terrorism is approached by the criminal acts that are involved in domestic terrorism. And so this new unit is going to be providing AUSAs out in the field at each one of the U.S. attorney's offices to help coordinate the cases against domestic terrorism cases. You are absolutely correct that the First Amendment is going to make this a difficult area because you can hold views that are not in keeping with what the government may consider to be kosher points of view. That is, if you hold a view that is they consider to be an extremist point of view, unless you are advocating some type of act of violence or advocating some overthrow of the government, it's not against the law. And so domestic terrorism is going to be much more driven by the actual acts as opposed to the ideas behind the different groups.
Well, I guess to get to another point here, the leader of DOJ is a political appointee. U.S. attorneys are political appointees. If there is, let's say, Donald Trump's in the White House, he might see Antifa as domestic terrorist. You know, you might have Joe Biden in the White House. He sees somebody else entirely as a domestic terrorist, I'm guessing. So is it kind of tricky that every 4 years who is on the target list could change?
Absolutely. That's why I say that domestic terrorism is really driven by acts or threats, as opposed to groups that have a point of view that differs from the government. Okay. When Donald Trump was the president, Antifa was a group that he specifically said should be considered to be domestic terrorists. There was pushback on the part of DOJ because they said that there was no one group called Antifa, but instead that it was an ideology. Well, now that we have the Biden administration in, white supremacist is the order of the day for domestic terrorism. And the concentration is on groups that, again, that have an ideology that may support white supremacism, but it does not fall under criminal acts unless there are threats or acts of violence.
Part of the charge will be to head off things that are dangerous. 58% of Americans just this week said to Quinnipiac they fear the democracy will crumble. 58%. And tensions can escalate very quickly. So you've been on the inside. How does DOJ, with this new unit, make sure they find the Ted Kaczynskis, the Timothy McVeighs, and not the Ruby Ridge guy, you know, who sold a modified gun? He was in a militia. he had white supremacist views, but he wasn't plotting to overthrow the government or to shoot anybody, it seems.
Yeah, that is a real problem. Here's the thing: is that when you put AUSAs in all the districts for the U.S. Attorney's Office, they are interested in doing prosecutions, and so they are going to be very aggressive in trying to get cases where people may be holding these points of view that are contrary to what the government may consider to be correct. The AUSAs are going to be pushing to make those into cases. They're going to be pushing for arrests. They're going to be pushing for convictions. They want to take people to the court. And so this is going to be a delicate balancing act with the First Amendment rights of individuals who may have points of view different than what the current government is. Is that, like you said, every 4 years, we may have a different point of view that may be focused on the left or the extreme left or the extreme right. Domestic terrorism has always been this type of thing, and that is why there hasn't been specific laws against domestic terrorism up to this time.
Kenneth Gray, with 20 plus years with the FBI, it is really helpful to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.